Hey friends, KetoND, Dr. G here. I am going live, attempting to, and I want to do a video on some things that have been on my mind and cover a couple of book reviews as well mixed in with that. But today I'm going to be discussing briefly four, actually two competing ideas that are related and intertwined. Let me explain. So, as you know, if you've watched my channel and are paying attention, there's a lot of interest in the high-fat ketogenic diet. At the same time, we've had for quite a while now the advocates for the low-fat vegan style diet. And so, two opposing poles there. Now, in one sense, we've got more of a vegan versus keto diet, so low fat versus high fat. But we also have this environmental element in terms of veganism, and the argument that animal foods are bad. So it's kind of blurring these four different things, topics, that is environmentalism, what is the diet that has the minimal impact on the environment, and then also what is the type of diet macronutrients that are actually healthy and animal-based or plant-based. So let me see if I can clarify that a little bit. So you can have a keto diet that is also vegan, and you can have a vegan diet that's low fat. You can have a vegan diet that has animal products in it. So these are topics that are not exclusive to one type of diet philosophy. But what I'd like to start out with, though, is just talk a little bit about this idea, these two competing ideas of low-fat diet versus high-fat diet. And this is not a new topic. It's not a new controversy. Going back, even back in ancient times, we see evidence where doctors talked about, or health people in writings discussed the idea of different kind of macronutrients that people could eat. In this country, in America, of course, we developed the nutrition idea around a low-fat, low cholesterol diet. And I'm going to flip the camera here for a second, not have my face on here. I'm just going to go through a few internet sites here and talk about this topic with you. And I will point out a couple of books that, if you want to delve into this, you could certainly find a lot online, or I'll give you some book recommendations. But essentially, way back in the 50s, I believe, it was when Ancel Keys, who was a doctor and researcher who developed the idea that fat, namely saturated fat and cholesterol, was the primary cause of increased cardiovascular disease in America and around the world. And so through his writings and his promotions, really, his promoting the idea, it took over in terms of the recommendations that the government and experts were putting out. Now, along the way, you had Dean Ornish. I have his site up, and I was just checking out what he's doing lately. He's been around a while, and he is, Ancel Keys is no longer, I think he died in 2004. So he originated the idea. And you read about the accounts of this guy, and he was a very, outgoing, outspoken, and very persuasive. And it's fascinating to read the history of a lot of dietary changes that have happened, and even in medicine, and what kinds of medicine we adopted, what treatments. We think we live in a science-based world, but in reality, when we look at politics and money and individual, we take kind of things personally. We have an ideal, and it's almost a fervor, a religious fervor, and a belief system that begins to sway how we interpret evidence in the world around us. And so this is nothing new. It continues to happen today. And it's sometimes very hard to gather the evidence and really objectively weigh both sides. I'm just a guy here. I've been studying this stuff for a while, so I bring my biases. But I look back at my approach over the years since I became aware of health, And I don't have any preconceived agenda. As a background, in the 90s, I got into my first health kick as a young adult, and I adopted a low fat, if not a non fat diet. So I lived this probably for almost 10 years. I adopted a diet that could be identified very similar to what Ornish advocates, for instance. So Ornish's site, so they do advocate for a plant-based, less than 10% of calories from fat diet. Nutrition they want you to join. They've got it's a very slick website, but they make the claim that you can reverse heart disease and cancer and lose weight and treat diabetes with this approach. And part of what I wanted to do on this video is to point out the common ground that at least I have with these kinds of doctors. So I won't talk about Ansel Keys as much, because I think it was a simplistic and academic look at simply reducing fats and cholesterol with the focus on saturated fat. The evidence we now know, let me just say this, that based on the wealth of information and studies on saturated fat and cholesterol from natural food sources, they do not cause the problems that the original, advocates were stating. And so Dean Ornish's program still holds on to that low-fat mantra, but what's helping people is this common ground that I want to talk about, and that is getting people off of junk food, sugar, and that includes junk fats. So simply using fat so non-specifically, I don't think is really helpful, because we know that a high-fat diet or a low-fat diet can help all of these same conditions. It's the type of fat that matters. And the same could be said for different forms of carbohydrates. And so I guess it's just human nature, and in the way we promote things, and often it's wrapped around what we're trying to sell someone, but it is always more difficult to get into the minutia of the details and to say, okay, hey, it's fat, but it's the right type of fats. And so it's useful to track your calories and look at your macronutrients, but I can't help but emphasize how important it is to select those natural food sources and to balance it. And I would consider myself to be, perhaps have more in common with Dean Ornish's diet than some of the, what I think are unhealthy keto diets. But I would just say, let's remove what's not scientific and not healthy from all of these diets and find what I would call my common ground. And so a balanced, nutrient-dense, high in whole foods diet that includes small to maybe moderate amounts of protein, depending on animal protein, that is, depending on the season and where someone lives. So that's this common ground. And I'll point out one of the books that I really first found when I was in college that I would highly recommend is Sally Fallon's book, Nourishing Traditions. This is a classic book. It is both an educational nutrition book and a cookbook. It really she covers the gamut on how traditions of eating all over the world lead to health when we honor certain known, it's really common sense that's been lost in our culture of heavily processed foods. Actually, she co-wrote with Mary Enig. She was a scientist who led the way on a lot of the fat problems and myths that were out there. And so highly recommended. The only drawback with her book is it's rather dense, and a lot of the recipes are a little bit cumbersome. But what it taught me is, I took the things that I like to use and cook and make. And honestly, getting into cookbooks should be it should teach you how to cook so that you can then go repeat it without always having to do it exactly like someone's telling you to do. That's me, and I've been doing this for decades. And so I'll just self-admit right now, I don't ever open up a cookbook anymore. I'll get general concepts, I guess perhaps now and then, and with my kids I'm teaching them, so I'll get recipes out, and we'll open these up. But you know, a lot of people don't like to cook because it is mentally and time challenging to, okay, look it up. What are the ingredients? Oh, I got to go shopping. I put together. We don't have time for that. But set aside time to begin to learn some techniques. You will never get healthy if you don't start making your own food for most of your dining experiences. So I don't want to go too long on this, but I'll go. Let's see. I want to talk about this really quick. So I'm going to link all this below, but I keep having this documentary coming up over and over again. It's been out for a while. I want to say it was in 2011 or 2010 when this review was written. Forks Over Knives. You can find it on Netflix and elsewhere. And I thankfully have not watched it. I've watched clips and I've read the reviews and I know the premise and I know the doctors that they provide the point. This was basically someone's agenda. It's a propaganda documentary, essentially. Now, is there good information in there? Yes. However, their conclusions are drawn on no science or lack of science, but simply a philosophy that they'd like to promote. And so many people watch this and they say many inaccurate things in there, including that animal products are causing heart disease and cancer. I would put out there that you could eat a plant-based diet and this has been shown in science, and have just as much of a risk because, again, the quality. Do plant foods cure people or prevent disease? Of course, but it's the processing and having the right kinds of foods. And meat and animal products can be very healing as well. So anyway, and of course they mix in that the whole environmental aspect of that. And I will argue and talk just really quick on the environmental impact of eating. So first off, it would be most environmentally friendly if we all stopped eating. So let me just, if we're going to measure the impact of human beings on the planet, if we weren't here, we would not be generating any greenhouse gases. That is, by the way, one of the flaws, and I personally think the science behind the environmental impact on diets is that they're primarily talking about greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is naturally produced by things on our planet besides humans. And so what I would say is that we should try to limit excessive waste. We should eat locally. Buying foods that are imported, if you're a vegan, that's a lot of waste of energy, and there's obviously more greenhouse gases. So if you ate a balanced with a plant-based and animal-based diet locally as much as you can, that would be more economical and less environmentally impacting than if you ate a vegan diet that was, especially all the processed foods and imported foods and the added sugar and starch, how that's being produced. I mean, you can just look up the impact of all the farming, corn, soybean. Now, granted, a lot of that goes to the animal feeding, and the processing of the excessive eating of meat is not good. But I never could figure out why vegans get so adamantly anti-meat, whereas those of us who are more balanced or even meat eaters, they don't say we should stop eating vegetables. That's terrible. Or, of course, I don't know. I get it. There's some animal lovers, and I love animals, and we should be taking care of them and be good stewards of the planet. But, plants have to die for us to eat, and, animals, I believe, were provided. My cats, by the way, would die if I decided that it was ethically more responsible to put them on a vegan diet. Humans, some of us have a dependence on animal products for best health. That's not controversial. There are a few of us who might have the genes and constitutions to be able to handle an all vegan diet, but I can tell you many, many stories over and over again about the strict vegans I've worked with who end up sick. You can find those stories online. So, let's see. So nourishing traditions, and anyway, that's just the point, is that what is the healthiest diet for humans? It is an experiment of each of us, figuring out how we feel and what we eat. We need to be It's really the food processing and how much sugar is added to foods. This is the other book I want to point out, The Big Fat Surprise. I think I mentioned it before. Incredible, very good book that documents this whole low fat, set cholesterol, and all of this stuff that we've been told that has a lot of holes and lacking science behind it. So, Nina Techols, I guess Techols is how you pronounce her name. Great book. She's got a lot of good research information there. Um, I won't talk too much about this. The Ketogenic Bible. This is been following Jacob Wilson, Ryan Lowry. These are doctor researchers who have a book. They're actually studying this stuff in terms of the whole fat versus low fat, in terms, and then health in terms of athletes and overall wellness. So anyway, I think I'm gonna wrap that up. But I just wanted to point out a couple of these things and to tell you all to continue to do your homework. And if you hear or read something and it's shocking or surprising and you think you want to change up, just do a little bit of homework. Be happy to continue the dialogue with any of you, and I appreciate the thumbs up. I'll be doing a little bit more in a little more detail. I want to show you some of the things that I'm doing to save money. Oh, by the way, on the sustainability, my food bill is lower when you eat a high-fat diet. It's more efficient calories. And so a lot of the comparisons when they do equal caloric intake don't take that into granted, that those that eat a more high fat but also animal based diet, you do consume less. And if we're putting on weight, we know something's broken and something's imbalanced, and we need to look at reducing not just the impact we're having on the environment, but what the impact is on our health. So anyway, appreciate you watching. Subscribe, please share, and thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. We'll see you in the next one.